Learning is chus for Shlema for Ilan Chai Baserach and Lis Neshama for Shlema Abba ben David. We're going to start from the two dots on bottom of Chav Ches Amud Aleph. This is like the crucial limud for certainly for Zevachim. This is where we learn out the din of pigul and the din of chutz l'mkaimai. Again, pigul is when a person has a machshava while he's doing one of the four avodas hadam that he's going to in some way consume part of the carbon at the wrong time, past its time. And the din on that is that it's possible. And if someone eats the basar of such a carbon, he's chayiv kares. And chutz l'mkaimai is the same setup where a person has a machshava during one of the avodas hadam to consume a consumable part of the carbon. But rather than being chutz l'zmani at the wrong time, he has in mind to do it outside of the Beis HaMikdash. And on that, the din is that it's possible, but it doesn't share that din that if someone eats the basar, that he's going to be chayiv kares. Okay, so now the Gemara asks, where does this all come from? So we're on Chav Ches Amud Aleph, 8 lines on the bottom. Possible v'ein by kares. Zok the Gemara. We know animili. Where does this come from? Amar Shmuel. Trei kroi ksibi. We learn now from two psukim. Mahi. What are the two psukim? Amar Rabba. It comes from the pasuk of at the beginning in Parshas Tzav, toward the beginning of Vayikra Perek Zayin, where it says, if we will eat from the basar of his Zevach Shlom on the third day, lo yeratza, hamakravai lo yeratza, he won't get acceptance, hamakravai lo yechashev, it won't be counted for him, pigul yiyah, it will be pigul. And the person who does this will bear his oven. Now later on, the Gemara is going to say how we see from here that we're talking about having a machshava, where a person is planning, where the kohen is planning to later eat chutz l'zmani and chutz l'mkaimai. It seems to be talking about where he actually did it, not where he was planning. Where it says that he ate, not that he thought about eating. So the Gemara is going to prove it later. But in any case, we darshan like this. Amar Rabba Shlishi. It says, V'yom HaShlishi, Zeu chutz l'zmani. Pigul, Zeu chutz l'mkaimai. It means Shlishi meaning the first part. Me'achal yachal b'yom HaShlishi is chutz l'zmani, is machshavas of pigul. Pigul, and when it says in the pasuk the word pigul, Zeu chutz l'mkaimai. That's a reference to chutz l'mkaimai, because we say a meina inyan, since it can't be used for chutz l'zmani, since we already learned it out. So it's telling you chutz l'mkaimai. And the pasuk on here is v'hanefesh haichalas mimenu. It says the person who does this, avoynei tisa, which we say is going to be gzeira shava to noiser, where it says also avoynei tisa, and the pasuk says that you get kares, but it says a nefesh, a single person, echad v'lei shnaim, only one of the two things that were mentioned in the pasuk get this din, zeu chutz l'zmani. It's coming to tell you only chutz l'zmani, only pigul has a din of kares and not chutz l'mkaimai. Why don't we say that the nefesh, this echad v'lei shnayim, is coming to talk about chutz l'mkaimai and not chutz l'zmani? Where do we know that chutz l'zmani, that it's coming to say chutz l'zmani gets kares and not chutz l'mkaimai? So the Gemara mistaber chutz l'zmani adif the pasuk bay. The Gemara suggests l'chayra chutz l'zmani is better because it started with it. The Gemara says no, adarab chutz l'mkaimai adif the samachlei. I could say the other way around. Chutz l'mkaimai is right near where it says avoynei tisa, so maybe that's a continuation. It says the one that we just said before, immediately preceding, is the one that gets malchus. It gets kares. So that is indecisive. It's not, doesn't teach us. We don't have a final answer. We go on what we learned on the. Remember that we learned Kshu Aimer Shlishi b'Parshas Kedoshim Tiyu. When the Torah says Shlishi and Kedoshim Tiyu, so this is a later pasuk, right? The pasuk we quoted before was in Parshas Tzav, in Perek Zayin and Vayikra. This is in Perek Yutes, in Parshas Kedoshim, and the Gemara will call the first. The Gemara calls the first pasuk. We're going to be going back and forth between these two psukim, bouncing back and forth. The first pasuk it calls the pasuk, the Parsha Arichta, the pasuk Arichta, the long pasuk, and the second one we call the pasuk in Kedoshim Tiyu. So in this second pasuk it says, and then afterwards, as we're going to see soon, the pasuk continues and tells us the din of noiser that it gets cars.
But doesn't this pasuk tell you that Pigul is actually referring to B'yom HaShlishi? Like Pigul who? Like this is Pigul, not the Mkoimai.
Well, we're saying the other way around. We're saying Pigul who. That was what the Gemara said, that the first thing B'yom HaShlishi tells you Pigul. And then Pigul who is the second thing to say Chutz L'Mkoimai, because we say Einei Inyan, it was extra. We said, why do you have to repeat yourself? You already said if you do it b'yom hashlishi.
Right.
Then it says Pigul, so that's Chutz L'Mkoimai.
But
then the question is, when it says afterwards Avoinei Tisa, and we say Hanefesh Eicheles, that's referring to, it says only one of them is going to get Avoinei Tisa, which is a reference to Karis. So now the question is, which one does it apply to?
No, that's fine if we only had the first pasuk, but the second pasuk tells you that what is Pigul. It tells you Pigul who, which is B'yom HaShlishi Pigul hu. Like this pasuk like explicitly tells you that this is the definition of Pigul B'yom HaShlishi.
Yeah, I mean it says on the other one Pigul Yia. I don't know.
Right, it's okay. That's more neutral. You could twist it any way you want, but Pigul hu, like this is Pigul.
So to you, I mean it sounds like we're saying this one is Pigul as opposed to the first one.
Right, the Chutz L'Zmana is Pigul. Because the pasuk tells you very explicitly, like this is Pigul.
So let's see how the Gemara darshans that pasuk. We'll see if it fits. I hear the observation you're making. We'll see if it works with the limud that the Gemara is trying to make, because the Gemara is now going to say what we do with this second pasuk. So. When it says that this thing, why do we have to say it? So the Gemara says, now we're going away from what we said before. We're saying that the longer pasuk that it said in Parshas Tzav, we're reviewing just the beginning of the sugya from yesterday. So when it says in Parshas Tzav, we're looking at that as all one pasuk. We're not looking at it as two separate things of B'yom HaShlishi Pigul. We're looking at it as it's one phrase, and that was all Pigul. And now we're saying when it says B'yom HaShlishi Pigul in Parshas Kedoshim Tiyu, that's Chutz L'Mkoimai. Because so even though it says Pigul hu, so I hear what you're saying, but that's if we say him an Einei Inyan, if it's unnecessary, we have to do something with it. Although you could, and the truth of the matter is the Gemara had said that even on the Pigul that we said before. So if we don't have a choice, we have to say it's referring to Chutz L'Mkoimai. So Zok the Gemara, Umiyat Rachmana Gabi Noiser. Then the pasuk continues later in that parsha with the short pasuk in Kedoshim, and it says V'oichel avavayne yisa ki es kodesh Hashem chila v'nechos ha'nefesh shehi me'amel. The pasuk, and that's in pasuk Ches over there before we were reading pasuk Hey. And the pasuk continues, and it says that you're going to get karas, and the question is, what is that? And that is part of where it's talking about actually eating noiser, and the pasuk says over there that you're going to get karas. But it says only the one who's oichlav, he's gonna, that only this one who actually eats the nicer is going to get karas. And it's coming to exclude the immediately preceding pasuk in Kedoshim to you, which we just said, because of the main inyan is reference to chutzlum kaimai, and it's telling you chutzlum kaimai doesn't get karas. That's the way. That's the setup. That the first pasuk in Tzav is telling you pigel, and it says of the Avoin of Yisa, and we still that too. Avoin of Yisa means karas, but then it says the second pasuk in Kedoshim Tiyu, which is telling you chutzum kaimai, and even though it says over there also Avoin of Yisa, but then it continues. It says va'oichlav Avoin of Yisa legabi noiser, which is telling you only noiser gets karas, but not something else, and therefore it's excluding chutzum kaimai. So the Gemara asks on that the aim of Va'ichlav Avoin of Yisa zeu chutzlum kaimai ulumute noiser mikaras. How do you know that this is Va'ichlav Avoin of Yisa, that you're attaching it? You're saying it's a reference to noiser when someone actually ate the carbon chutzla zmane. Maybe that Avoin of Yisa is saying chutzlum kind of gets cars, but noiser doesn't get cars. We don't know, even though that the pasuk is mentioning they're both a chutzlum kaimai, someone who has a machshava eating it but at the wrong time, as well as it's a reference. It also is referring to someone who actually ate it. So maybe it's telling you only va'oichlav Avoin of Yisa is saying chutzlum kaimai gets karas and not noiser. So Gemara mistaber noiser havalei l'okum b'karas. It's better to say noiser gets karas l'migmar oven l'chutzlu zmani, because we want to then use it. We want to use that as a source for chutzlu zmani, for pigel, where we make, like we've said before, we did now we're first seeing it, that we make a gzeir shava from noiser to chutzlu zmani. The domale bezav, because chutzlu zmani is daima to noiser in two ways. It's daima to noiser that they're both noiser is where you eat the carbon, the basar of the carbon outside of the zman, so the zayin is zman, and chutzl zmani is where he had in mind to eat it chutzl zmani or to consume it chutzl zmani, and the beis is bama, that both of them are capable of being found outside. I'm sorry. That they can even be applicable on a bama. Chutzlum kaimei is not going to be applicable on a bama because it could be you're outside of the Beis Hamikdash, so you can't have a chutzlum kaimei. But noiser and chutzlum zmani are both applicable on a bama. Zok the Gemara adarab. So that's the reason why we'd say we'd rather make the pasuk of karas be on noiser, because then it would be a better gzeir shava. It'll tell you gzeir shava to chutzlum zmani. So tomorrow, let's say that the chutzlum kaimai is the one when the Torah says karas in the pasuk in Kedoshim to you. It's not referring to noiser, but it's talking about chutzlum kaimai lemigma oven lechutzlum zmani, the double b'mikdash. There's a lot more things that are similar between chutzlum kaimai and chutzlum zmani than there are between noiser and chutzlum zmani. That was and the initials for the similarities between chutzlum zmani and chutzlum kaimai, even though it's like almost obvious. First of all, mem is machshava, that both of them have to do with having in mind to do something as opposed to actually doing something. Noiser is you actually did something. Chutzlum zmani and chutzlum kaimai is both machshava, and kuf is ktsas, meaning that it doesn't have to be the entire. It doesn't have to be that you did the whole thing. Even a kazayas is enough to ruin it, to be passel the whole carbon. And dam, that it's a machshava during the dam, when doing the avodas hadam. And the shin is shlishi, that they're both, the Torah uses the lashon shlishi. So, and we said the second shlishi is a reference to chutzum kaima, right? So both chutzum zman and chutzum kaima are referred to in the pasuk as shlishi. So it would make more sense that when the Torah says karas, it's referring to chutzum kaima rather than nicer. So the Gemara is stuck again that it wasn't. We weren't able to give a good reason for our explanation of why we said that when the pasuk says karas, it's a reference to nicer as opposed to chutzum kaimai, because we don't want chutzum kaimai to end up with karas, because that's not the din. So where do we see again? So we're back to square one. Where do we see that chutz l'zmani gets karas and chutz l'kaimai doesn't? El Amar Rabbi Yechanan Tani Zavdi Bar Levi. Asya Kodesh Kodesh. We learn it out in Gzeir Shava of Kodesh Kodesh. That tells you that nicer, right? We were trying to say, we're not going all the way back to square one, to be honest. What we're really doing is just reevaluating the last question. How did we know when it says Karas in the Pasuk in Kadeshim Tiyu, it's talking about the nicer as opposed to the Chutzum Kaima? So we say we learn it out from Kodesh Kodesh as a Gzeir Shava. Ksiv Hacha as Kodesh. It's Kodesh Hashem Chilal. That's part of the pasuk in Kedoshim to you. So it says Kodesh. As Hanoiser Ba'esh Lo Yeyachal Ki Kodeshu. So it also uses a lashon Kodesh. Malalon Noiser Afkan Noiser. So it's telling you, just like over there, the Sarafta Oiser Ba'esh, which is talking about Noiser. That's directly talking about nicer. It says a lashon kodesh, and it says kodesh here. So when it says over here that you get karas, that's also talking about nicer. Umir Rachmana Gabi Noisa v'Oichla v'Oinesi Yisa Lemute Chotzum Kaime. And then now we could say, but the Torah says only the one who gets karas. Pasuk says only one of them. That means only nicer, but not Chotzum Kaime mikaras. Now the Gemara asks, well, my chazas, the Kra Aricha, the Kra Aricha is the way we refer to the pasuk in Parshat Tzav, which is a longer pasuk describing B'yom HaShlishi. Why are we saying that this Kra Aricha b'chutz l'zmani u'shlishi the Parshat Kedoshim Tiyu chutz l'mkaimei? Why are we saying the first pasuk is talking about chutz l'zmani and the second one is chutz l'mkaimei? Eipachana, let's say the other way around. So the Mefarshim asked the question, which is a very good question, that what the pasuk is talking about is eating on the third day. So you have to, and then we say that the second pasuk is going because of a tneu imene inyan lechutz lezmane tneu inyan lechutz l'mkaimei. So it's very hard to understand how you could say that the first one is going to be the chutz l'mkaimei, which is an imene inyan. The first thing has to be the obvious, the pashta pshat, and then the second one could be imene inyan. So it's a little hard to understand the Gemara's question over here, suggesting that the first one should be chutz l'mkaimei, since that's not the natural pshat of B'yom HaShlishi, which is talking about eating it past the time. Zok the Gemara, Mistaba aricha b'chutz l'zmani. L'chayra, we have a reason to say that the first pasuk is talking about chutz l'zmani. The Gemara avan minaisa. Because we have, it says in V'nasa Avainai, and it says by Naisa also V'nasa Avainai, Minaisa the Damile Bezav. So we could compare it to Naisa. We have Gzeir Shava to Naisa, and it's daima to it in, like we said, in Zman and with Bama. So Tamar Adarabba, Aricha b'chutz l'mkaimei u'shlishi d'gdoshim tiyu b'chutz l'zmanei, Mishum the Damile Samche, v'kama Mayele. Says, I will tell you the other way. I have a better svara. Why the pasuk in Kedoshim Tiyu, rather than the pasuk in Tzav, should be talking about chutz l'zmani. Because immediately after that, it says, it's coming to be memayit, that we say by Noiser, that this gets karas, and the one before it does not. So, l'chayra, that should be, to put it, to say, we would, since they're similar, right? like we said before, that chutz l'zmani, you're saying chutz l'zmani is similar to karas because of zav, and therefore it's when it says oven, that's a reference to that means that the pasuk in Sav is talking about chutz l'zmanai. I'll tell you the other way around. Let's say that the first one is talking about chutz l'kaimai, but since it's since nicer is similar to chutz l'zmanai, the pasuk that it's referring to immediately before it should also be chutz l'zmanai. Don't say that it's the gzeir shava to a pasuk that's 20 prakim earlier. Say it's the parsha part of the same parsha, and it's come to be mayit that chutz l'zmanai does not get karas. So that's obviously, and that's not the correct result. So again, we are once again stuck. How do we know that chutz l'zmanai gets karas and chutz l'mkaimid doesn't? Ela amarava kulu mikra aricha asim. We go back to what we had said originally, that everything is learned from so Rav is going to explain that the whole thing is learned from the first pasuk, the pasuk in Tzav. The chsiv he'achal yachal. The Torah first says, we're going to go through the pasuk piece by piece according to Rav. He'achal yachal, if he eats from the carbon, b'shtei achilas akasim medaber. Torah is referring to two achilas, echad achilas adam, ve'echad achilas mizbeach. That's telling you that if he has in mind to eat it, either that he's going to eat the basar chutz l'zmanai, or the person's if he's going to put the dam on the mizbeach at the wrong time, or if the person's going to eat the basar at the wrong time, either one will be a valid machshava to make a chutz l'zmanai, chutz l'mkaimeh. The basar zevach shlomov. The pasuk continues from the basar of his shlomim. Mashlamim mifaglin umispaglin. Just like a shlomim that has parts that can cause something to become pigel, meaning that if you have in mind by the zrikas hadam, by anyone or by any of the avodas hadam, that can make it pigel, and as well as that there's the basar that is supposed to be eaten by the owner, that if the carbon became pigel, it becomes mispagel, it becomes usher with the chi of karas, that if he eats it. Av kol mefagel and mispagel. So too, every carbon that's gonna apply the din of pigel is gonna have two aspects of it, both that it has something that is able to make it pigel, as well as something that becomes pigel, that if you later eat it after it became pigel, you'll be mechoyev karas. Shlishi, and we'll continue with the pasuk. Shlishi zeu chutz l'zmanai. Shlishi, the pasuk says, "B'yom shlishi." That's a reference to chutz l'zmanai. Lo yirotza. The pasuk continues, "Lo yirotza kartzos kosher kacha hartzos pasul." Just like the acceptance of the kosher, so too the hartzos of the pasul. Mahartzos kosher achi yikravu kol matirav. When you're going to have a din of chutz l'zmanai to make something pigel, that you're going to be chayiv karas for eating it, it has to be that kol matirav, all the things that are needed to make this carbon a kosher carbon have to have been completed. That means, this is Rava all the way at the beginning of Zevachim, if you remember, that we said that he says if you bring a carbon and you have a machshavas pigel in the, let's say by the shechita, you say you have in mind you're gonna eat it chutz l'zmanai, and then he stops there, it's not going to get a din pigel unless he completes and does all of the rest of the avodas adam. He has to do the kabbalah, halacha, and zrika, and that if he does them properly, then it has a din pigel. Otherwise, it's just going to be a pasul of carbon, but with eating it would not be mechayiv him karas. And the pasuk continues, hamakriv, right? Hamakriv oisei lo yechashav. The pasuk says hamakriv ba'kravu nifsal ve'ein nifsal b'shlishi. It's going to become possible to become pigel. This is what we've been talking about for a long time. The pasuk says it's only when he's makriv it with a machshava that it becomes possible as a pigel, but it's not nifsal b'shlishi. if he waits to the 3 days and then eats it, that's not going to make it pigel. It has to be a machshava, not actually eating it past the time. Oisai. So the pasuk continues a makar of oisai, it. It's telling you that the carbon becomes possible, but the kohen who did it, even though he's a fool and he did the wrong thing, he's not going to become kicked out of the kahuna for doing it. The pasuk continues, lo yechashiv. He shouldn't think, lo ya'arev b'machshavas acheres. He can't mix in other machshavas. We're going to explain later on, but basically, if he has a different machshava to passel, so then it won't be a kosher carbon. It has to be a kosher carbon every other way other than the pigel. But by having this other machshava, that made it that it's possible for a different reason, so it doesn't get the dim pigel. Pasuk continues, pigel. So this is very much like we said all the way at the beginning of the sugya, that was saying that it's an Einei Inyan. If it's an Einei Inyan, it says pigel. Who we already said the Yom HaShlishi, which we said was talking about chutz l'zman. So therefore, the pigel in Parshat Tzav is chutz l'mkaimeh. And it says pigel yeh. What is it? Pigel yeh. Malamed shemistarfim zem zeh. Tells you that if you have half a kazayis of where he did a zrikas hadam, let's say, or with half a kazayis chutz l'zmanai, and then another half of kazayis of chutz l'mkaimai, you could be mitzdarif the two of them together to passel the carbon. V'nefesh oichelas imenu. Then the pasuk continues. V'nefesh oichelas avoinu yisa echad v'lo shnayim. It's coming to tell you only one of them is going to get avoinity. So ve'ezeh, which one is that? Zeh chutz l'zmanai. That's going to be chutz l'zmanai. The gomer oven minoiser. That we're going to learn oven minoiser the domilei bezav. That noiser is doimet zav. So the way he's understanding the second pasuk in Parshas Kedoshim Tiyu is only referring to actual noiser when the person actually eats a chutz l'zmanai. And over there it says avaynev yisa, and it says karas. So we know that noiser gets karas. So now when it says oven, and it says only one of the two things in this pasuk gets the din of karas, so we're going to say more likely to compare chutz l'zmanai to noiser than chutz l'mkaimai. We have nothing comparing chutz l'mkaimai to noiser. Before we were saying chutz l'mkaimai is more similar to chutz l'zmanai than chutz l'zmanai is to noiser, but chutz l'zmanai is more similar to noiser than chutz l'mkaimai is to noiser, because like we said, it has zman and it has bama. Amalei Rapapa L'Rava. So that's his final. So he learns it all from that pasuk. He learns the pasuk in Sav is referring to both chutz l'mkaimai and chutz l'zmanai, and it's more likely that when we say only one of them gets karas, that's chutz l'zmanai, which is more similar to noiser than, for obvious reasons. Noiser is talking about eating something past this time, and chutz l'zmanai is having machshavas chutz l'zmanai as opposed to chutz l'mkaimai. Amalei Rapapa L'Rava Lidi Dach Shlishi de Parshat Kedoshim Tiyu my Darashtebe. What are you doing with the Shlishi that it says in Parshat Kedoshim? You're saying it's all talking about noiser. So what does it say? B'yayim HaShlishi. He says it's coming to tell you it has to be a place in order for it to have a din of in order to have a din that we have in mind to consume the carbon chutz l'mkaimai, it has to be that it's a place that you could do both. You could be where you could bring dam, you could bring basar and imurim. And Rashi explains that means to exclude, for example, in the heichal. In the heichal, you're not allowed to eat them. You're not allowed to bring the dam into the heichal. You're not allowed to bring the basar into the heichal. These places are. So if you were to have in mind to do it to there, that's not going to passel. In fact, the Gemara v'teipaklei mikra kama mehachal yachal midafka chmana b'lashon shlishi. Why don't we learn from the pasuk in Parshat Tzav where it says And he's and talking about over there, we said Tzav is not just Chutz L'Mkaimi, it's also Chutz L'Zmani. Amar Ravashi, Amrisha L'Shmaitza Kameder of Masna, Amali, Ime Hasam, if you were going to learn out this din, that if you would to have in mind to consume it in the Heichel, as opposed to a place where you could have all three things, the Dam, the Bas, and the Emurim, Havamina, Shlishi Prat, Pigel Klal, Nasa Klal Moisef Ala Prat, this Rabbi Sharma Kaimis. If it would be over there, it would come out to be a Prat, Klalu Prat. And then that would be telling you, Adarab, it will be telling you that in the Heichel, which is excluded from the Shlishi, which doesn't have all these things, it's going to be Misraba. So Kamash Malon, by saying Shlishi again in Parashas Kedoshim, that it's saying only a place that has that is able to be that you have Dam, Basar, and Imur. Okay, we're going to stop over here, and I'm going to have to continue tomorrow. Be'ez Hashem will continue a little bit further. I'm just going to give you a heads up. I'm not sure what